Canadien de Prévision des Ouragans, warning preparedness meteorologist with the Canadian Hurricane Center. Mr. Robichaud is going to deliver an update on Hurricane Dorian in English, puis en français. The briefing will be followed by a brief question and answer session. At this time, I'd like to welcome Mr. Bob Robichaud to the podium. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Slide here. What we have here is just the latest satellite image showing where Dorian is right now. It actually made landfall in the Carolinas early this morning at around 9:35. As of right now, the maximum sustained wind speeds are 150 kilometers per hour, so it's maintained its strength over the last few hours here. It is moving northeast. We anticipated this move over the last few days, and it has begun that. Next slide. So, looking at our official track from the Canadian Hurricane Center, we expect that the storm will continue to accelerate over the next few hours into tomorrow and approach the Atlantic coast of Nova Scotia probably late tomorrow. And right now, this is the latest track that we have from the Canadian Hurricane Center. Our forecasters are looking at some of the new data, and what we might end up doing is nudge that track a little bit farther to the west, but it is going to look something very similar to this. But I'll also go to the next slide, please. The red lines here basically indicate the range of possibilities of where this storm is going to go. 24 hours out, we're still looking at errors involved in track forecasting that are about 80 kilometers. So basically that means, given the angle of approach, that means that potential track anywhere from western Nova Scotia to Cape Breton is still on the table. Next slide. So this is just a representation of where the strongest winds are going to be. In this case, this represents the probability of tropical storm force winds. And right now, we expect the strongest winds with Dorian as it approaches Nova Scotia to be in the western part or the eastern part of Nova Scotia. What we're going to see with Dorian is also a band of stronger winds from the southwest as the storm goes by. So that's also going to affect southeastern New Brunswick into Prince Edward Island as well, and then up into Newfoundland and Labrador as we get into Sunday. Next slide, please. So this is just a representation of the expected rainfall or the model output for rainfall associated with Dorian. So what we're looking at now is anything to the left of the track, that's where the heaviest rain is going to fall. We're expecting anywhere around 50 to 100 millimeters, with potentially reaching 150 millimeters in some localized area. So that's the latest on Dorian as we stand. If you want to go back, and we'll do the whole thing in French again. Donc, les dernières nouvelles sur Dorian. Dorian a touché les Carolines plus tôt ce matin, 9h35. Présentement, les vents associés avec Dorian sont de 150 km à l'heure. Et la tempête se dirige vers le nord-est à peu près une trentaine de kilomètres à l'heure. Donc, ça a doublé en vitesse durant les dernières 24 heures. Next slide. Donc, la trajectoire de Dorian, on s'attend que la tempête va approcher la côte atlantique de la Nouvelle-Écosse durant la journée de samedi. Malgré la trajectoire qu'on a présentement, c'est encore possible que la tempête passe dans le sud-ouest de la Nouvelle-Écosse jusqu'au Cap-Breton. Ça fait que ça, c'est encore sur la table. Mais actuellement, on prévoit que la tempête devrait diriger plus près de la ville d'Halifax. En tant que vent, on s'attend que les vents les plus forts devraient être à la droite de la trajectoire. On peut s'attendre à des vents qui pourraient atteindre le 140, 150 km à l'heure, c'est possible. On va avoir des vents pas tout à fait aussi forts que ça à la gauche de la trajectoire, donc le sud-est du Nouveau-Brunswick. L'île du Prince-Édouard va aussi avoir des vents très forts. Finalement, du côté précipitation, on a toujours des pluies très abondantes associées avec des tempêtes tropicales. C'est encore le cas ici avec Dorian. On s'attend que les régions juste à l'ouest de la trajectoire pourraient aller chercher jusqu'à 100 à 150 mm de pluie. Ça sera durant les pluies les plus fortes. On prévoit que ça devrait être dans la journée, tard dans la journée de samedi et dans les heures de la soirée et au cours de la nuit de samedi à dimanche.
Okay, we're going to start our question and answer session right now. If you could please turn my mic on. Okay. So we will start with questions in the room, alternating between those on the line as well. I'd ask you please state your name and organization before asking a question. And if you are in the room, please wait for us to give you the portable microphone before asking your question. All right, so we'll go to a question in the room right now. Une question dans la salle, s'il vous plaît. Okay, microphone to the lady right here. Microphone. Okay.
Hi, Taryn Grant with Star Metro. What kind of comparisons can you make to historical storms that have hit Nova Scotia in the past?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
What comparisons can you make between Dorian and storms that have hit Nova Scotia in the past?
This one is certainly going to be up there in terms of impacts. We know what kind of impacts that we get with winds of over 120 kilometers per hour this time of year with all the leaves on the trees. So what we should expect are things like uprooted trees, broken trees. That may result in extended power outages. Those are all the things that we know happen when we get these kinds of conditions.
And are there any named storms that this resembles so far in the way that it's tracking?
It's always tricky to compare storms because storms arrive at different times of year with different preconditions. Sometimes the ground is saturated, sometimes it's not. So it's always difficult to compare one storm against the other.
All right, we are going to go to another question in the room right now, and we ask that you please do limit it to one question and one follow-up. So, are there any other questions in the room?
Are there anything, my name is Kieran Kenning, we're at the coast. We have a couple surfers in the province who are getting pretty excited about the potential waves coming. Do you have any sort of advice or words for them as they get on the water?
Well, the advice would be to stay away from those waves, but we do expect some fairly large waves to arrive along the Atlantic coast, probably late afternoon tomorrow into the evening. But those conditions can be extremely dangerous, and unfortunately, we've lost a number of people that have been swept away by these waves over the years with just these types of storms.
Mr. Robichaud.
Yep.
Just wait, sorry, until we give you the mic. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Robichaud. Can you describe this storm in comparison to Juan, please?
Well, Juan was a Category 2 when it made landfall. In terms of the track, there might be some similarities there. But the strongest winds that we saw with Juan were 176 kilometers per hour here at McNabbs Island. We don't expect anything quite that strong. However, there may be winds that are actually extend over a larger area than Hurricane Juan did. So some of the impacts might be a bit spread out more over different parts of the Maritimes as opposed to concentrated in this area.
And can you describe the risk to coastal communities, please?
Yeah, along the along the Atlantic coast, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to get some pretty significant waves coming onto the coast tomorrow late in the afternoon into the evening hours, and then overnight hours in eastern Nova Scotia and into Sunday in Newfoundland. So those waves are going to be the really important part of the coastal risk at this particular stage. Storm surge is always an issue with the hurricanes. Luckily, the storm is arriving at low tide, at least for the eastern shore area, so that might mitigate some of the damage we might see. We're also looking at the risk for potential elevated water levels in the Gulf of St. Lawrence as well, so it's not just going to be an Atlantic coast issue.
That track that we're looking at right now,
Right.
Where is it making landfall, where do you expect it to first hit Nova Scotia?
The best estimate right now is somewhere near Halifax or just east of Halifax. This represents the latest track right now, but I know that our forecasters are working on the update for 3 p.m. And from my discussions with them just before coming up here, the plan is to move that track a little bit more towards Halifax.
And you had mentioned a little further west. So at one point during
Yeah,
your initial presentation, so
Yeah.
does that mean further south in Nova Scotia along the coast?
That would be further down the coast, yes. Yeah,
Okay. Smaller communities?
yeah.
Can you describe when it becomes a tropical storm versus a hurricane?
A tropical storm, well, in this track, it's going to be, we expect it to make landfall as a hurricane. And then we expect it to move towards Newfoundland into the Gulf of St. Lawrence and then become a post-tropical storm at that particular stage. But it will be a hurricane strength post-tropical storm, meaning we still have hurricane force winds associated with that storm as it's moving up there. So when we're talking about tropical versus post-tropical, all we're talking about is the structure of the storm. We're saying nothing about how severe it can be.
Maintenant, il y a une personne.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to move to another question in the room.
La région de Marie-Ève Guimond, Radio-Canada, la région a été aussi victime d'une sorte de grande averse la semaine dernière avec Erin. Est-ce que les pluies aujourd'hui, les grandes vagues que vous avez mentionnées peuvent encore avoir un impact puis peut-être même causer d'importantes inondations? À quoi on doit s'attendre?
Oui, du côté des vagues, pas tellement. Ce qu'on parle de comparaison avec ce qu'on a eu la semaine passée. Mais si on regarde les régions qui sont plus à risque d'avoir le plus de précipitations, c'est les mêmes régions qui ont été affectées par Erin la semaine passée. Donc, c'est certainement, ça va être une zone à surveiller, l'ouest de la Nouvelle-Écosse, la vallée de l'Annapolis. C'est là qu'on prévoit les pluies les plus abondantes. Si on a une trajectoire comme qu'on l'a présentement.
Et pouvez-vous aussi répéter en français la réponse que vous venez de mentionner, là, la différence entre un ouragan et une tempête tropicale?
Oui, quand on parle de tempête tropicale versus post-tropicale, on parle de la structure de la tempête, pas nécessairement de l'intensité de la tempête. Donc, on prévoit que Dorian va arriver sur la côte de la Nouvelle-Écosse comme un ouragan, mais se transformer en tempête post-tropicale, mais de force d'ouragan. Ça fait qu'on parle quand même d'une tempête très intense qui va se diriger vers Terre-Neuve.
Merci.
How many hurricanes have made landfall in Nova Scotia, and what was the most recent one?
The most recent one was Earl in 2010. I don't have the number off the top of my head of how many, but there have been many over the years. And the database goes back to the 1800s, 1842, I believe.
What would be the frequency?
We tend to get tropical weather systems affecting Canada in one way or another, usually about once a year on average. This year we're already at 2. We typically have about 2 to 3 that actually enter our Canadian Hurricane Center response zone, which is a much larger area covering some of the offshore areas as well.
Jesse Thomas with Global News. I know some people are scrambling to get their amenities. Some people have been downplaying the storm, but can you give us, again, a timeline when we expect to see landfall?
Yeah, I have to make the distinction between landfall and when the impacts are going to start to occur. I think we're going to start to see the winds start to increase tomorrow morning in western Nova Scotia. That should propagate across the province late morning into the afternoon hours. So we're looking at a fairly nasty late afternoon over much of the southern Maritimes. Then the really strong winds will arrive with the center of the storm, which should be in the evening to overnight hours. So the worst conditions should happen tomorrow night.
Can you talk about the effect, if any, of climate change on the intensity of storms like this?
Well, where the science is right now with respect to climate change and tropical cyclones is that we may end up in slightly stronger storms in a warmer climate, but the frequency might not be quite as high as it is now. So that's kind of where things lie with that.
Again, waters and the warmth of the waters, the coolness of the waters, is that are we a little bit warmer or not this year?
It is a little bit warmer out there now, and it looks like the track might actually move over one of those patches of warm water, which would explain partially why or we have such a strong storm when it arrives tomorrow.
Is that a climate change matter?
No, we usually get these warm eddies that form in the ocean over the course of the year, and they might migrate towards us and then move away, that sort of thing. It's just a timing thing in this particular case.
Okay.
Are there any other questions in the room?
I'm just wondering if you could pick one slide, and since you're on a wireless, just kind of guide us along.
Yep.
Whatever slide you think is most appropriate.
Okay, if you go to the previous one, go back again. All right, so here's the storm now as of about a couple hours ago. So it's moving in a northeasterly direction, and it's going to continue to do so. This time frame is tomorrow evening. So tomorrow evening we have the center of the storm just off the coast of Nova Scotia. Again, if our forecasters do end up moving this track a little bit further towards the west, this is going to be very close. The center of the storm is going to be very close to Halifax tomorrow evening around 9 p.m. From there, it's going to continue across Nova Scotia into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, headed towards Newfoundland as a very, very strong, potent post-tropical storm. But as I said earlier, if you can see on the satellite image, you can see some of the cloud shield from the storm itself actually already moving into the southwestern part of the province. So no precipitation yet, but we do expect the precipitation and the winds, for that matter, to actually start affecting Nova Scotia prior to the arrival of the center of the storm.
Can you give us an idea of what people can expect to see in terms of impact and what people should watch out for in terms of safety measures?
Absolutely. We know that when we get winds this strong this time of year, that we are going to get uprooted trees. We're going to get broken trees. We know, for example, with Hurricane Juan, for example, although it was a Category 2 storm when it made landfall, the tree damage was more consistent with a Category 3. So we tend to get really bad tree damage when we get 120 plus kilometer per hour winds on a day like today or tomorrow when the leaves are still on the trees. So I think that's going to be the major impact. Flooding, of course, when we get rainfall rates that exceed 20 millimeters per hour, which is very, very possible with this, almost likely. That overwhelms many systems, and you tend to get flash flooding when you get those kinds of heavy rainfalls.
In some cases, depending on where it sits, one side is rain, one side is wind.
Yeah.
Is this both that it is going to hit us?
Very good question. We are going to see a kind of dissection between the wind and the rain hazard. The rain is definitely going to be on the left-hand side of the track, wherever that track ends up being. The strongest winds are going to be on the right, but we can't exclude the potential for strong winds just as the storm is going by. So after the storm goes by, there's some strong winds that may develop out of the southwest or out of the west that could be, damaging winds as well. So that's another thing we're going to have to watch out for.
The lifeline is the Chignecto Isthmus.
Yep.
Is it okay in this case? Is the tidal surge such that it's not going to overcome the Trans-Canada?
Yeah, based on this track, we wouldn't expect issues there with that, no. If this was further west, then like going up the Bay of Fundy, that might be a different story. But for now, with this track, that area should be fine.
Just a question, hypothetically, do you expect this to affect the bridges here?
The
closure?
bridges,
Yeah.
typically we would see winds with this that would result in some kind of restriction. You'd have to ask them to see exactly what their plans are, but we would see winds strong enough to have an impact area.
Okay, it looks like that covers our questions in the room. Unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, we're going to ask that Bob represent the information for the participants on the phone. So if we could just restart the presentation, and Bob, if you could quickly run through what you've already stated. Pour ceux au téléphone, on va répéter la présentation. Alors, je vous présente Bob Robichaud, meteor.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
All for bonuses. So in both languages?
Yes, please.
Okay. So as of earlier today, Dorian made landfall in the Carolinas as a Category 1 hurricane. It has started this move towards the northeast, which we've been anticipating now for a few days. It is accelerating towards the